Denver Street Stories.
The views expressed by any individual in this interview are entirely their own and not necessarily shared by Denver Street Stories. Denver Street Stories is an active supporter in the LGBTQ+ community. We stand with the Black Lives Matter movement, and as intersectional feminists, we support equity and equality for all peoples. Denver Street Stories supports sovereignty and land back to indigenous communities. We strive to actively deconstruct oppressive colonialist structures. Denver Street Stories. These are our stories.
We're Denver Street Stories here in Paco Sanchez Park with Rose today. Would you like to introduce yourself?
Yes, I'm Rose. Pronouns are they, them, and I have been unhoused since late summer 2019, and I've been living in a van in that time. So, and that's what I still do, mostly staying at parks.
Cool. Okay. Well, I guess first, can we please ask about the Kraken creature because it's super awesome looking?
Yeah. So this is I crochet. I've been crocheting since about 2010, and I've just been trying to get better at it as I go. And so this is a recent thing that I finished, probably like my second most recent thing that I completed, and it's just, it's impressive. It's got a lot more detail, a lot more sewing than I usually do, so it really was like pushing myself. And while I was working on it, I thought it was really cool, but while I was working on it, I was like, I'm not gonna make another one of these, so let me just put my best effort into this one. So I'm happy with it.
Do you like doing art mostly by yourself or with other people too?
I guess I definitely benefit from body doubling, so like having other people around to engage in activities while I'm engaging in activities is really helpful. I host a craft group for queer folks, and that kind of just came out of just trying to interact. So I don't know if I like prefer to craft with people, but I know that if left to my own devices, I tend to self-isolate, and I know that that can like negatively affect my just mood, more susceptible to depression and stuff when I haven't been around people. So socializing is more like a pushing myself to do it, because I know it has benefits, a little more so than like, oh man, I just really want to socialize, let's go do it.
Well, so I guess like you like to socialize a lot. Is it different, or like how is it different socializing like before you were unhoused versus being unhoused?
Yeah, like I feel like the housing status has not really had a big impact on like, I guess I have to like give a little context. So I moved here from Maryland. I used to work full time, and I also had a side project, so I would work full time, come home, work on that, and I would host. Like I would have people come over. Like I had an apartment, so like my siblings could come visit me, which was awesome. I could have friends over. In college, I lived in a house where we could just throw parties, and so I started throwing parties. I was never invited to a single party, I think, when I was a teenager. So in college I was like, yes, and I can be the host, and I can disappear in my room and just like, or what, I don't know, it was cool. So I kind of got into being in that kind of hosting way or having people around. And then when I moved, I was just isolated. Like I had when I was still in Maryland, I had like an anxiety break, something like that, that really affected my ability to continue working full time. And I moved out here and was having a hard time finding a job that would be a good fit. And I was also just having trouble with like having to have regular commitments. So I'm disabled, so that's like, I guess, a key point in this. And largely, I wouldn't say being disabled is why I'm unhoused. I'm unhoused because of housing costs anything at all, or costs way too much. But I was working and doing as much as I could. But once I came here, really, like I was working from home, so I wasn't making work friends. I wasn't like leaving the house really, so I wasn't meeting people in the world, and really I was just so isolated that eventually like I was having a hard time. Just like I would be like, okay, I have to go to the store, standing at the door, like having to psych myself up, unable to open the door, unable to go outside, and it just became really difficult. So that's when I started intentionally. I joined like an art group. I joined like a couple different groups, but the art group was the one that I kind of stuck with, and I went there every week until the pandemic started and the group was no longer around. But I still hadn't really met friends. I hadn't made friends. I had been socializing. But then the pandemic hit, and somebody who I had met invited me to just come down to 5 Points, where a lot of people stay outside and there's a lot of tents and stuff. And so just to come out, chat with people, and to make a list of like things that people said that they needed access to that they didn't have access to. And so I started doing that, and one of the biggest things that there were all kinds of things, and we wrote down everything and turned it into an actionable thing. But a big thing that people were asking about was water. And so I was like, that feels like something I can do. So I started coming out 4 to 5 days a week to distribute water to folks. And it's not sustainable. It doesn't give people all the water that they need, but it was a good opportunity to just be in the environment, to communicate with people, to get to know folks. And then so that's when I found that I just really enjoyed being around other houseless people, because I always felt, even before I said that I experienced houselessness, because it turns out that I actually had experienced houselessness several times in my past, before I realized it. But before that, I lost my train of thought. But I really enjoyed being around people. I always felt like I had to mask, pretend, act like I had more in common with the people I was around than I actually did, just so that I could fit in.
So have you kind of found like a community now with other unhoused folks?
I would say for sure. And I definitely feel a greater sense of comfort around other houseless people than I ever did, and still around house people, and like more specifically like people who have experienced houselessness or experienced poverty, or basically folks who don't have a like everything is fine, it's all God's will, everything's going great, don't worry about it. Like I can't deal with that perspective. So
your food smells really good. Can you also tell us what you're cooking in the background?
Yeah, so my food is over there completely like not being watched by anybody. But I'm making it's a sweet potato curry, coconut curry. So there's some coconut milk in there, and I'm using some veggies that I got from the food bank. And I just it's nice to be able to cook, because I live by myself. And so typically to cook for myself, it's really small, like one serving, gonna finish it that night, because I don't have refrigeration. I don't have a way to store leftovers until the refrigerator season, which is the cold season. But so during this hot season, it's I'm just, people are around, so I can cook a little bit more, don't have to worry about maybe throwing it away. And then also staying at a park like this, or there's some other parks where there do tend to be more houseless people. So it's also just an opportunity. I smell it too now, the curry powder. But it's just an opportunity to share a meal, share like some kind words. Some of the biggest impacts, like if we're not changing the whole system, then we can be friendly to each other. We can be kind to each other. So, yeah,
I feel like that's
big.
something a lot of people miss, because they're like, they just like don't want to interact with unhoused people, or for some reason they seem to think that like they're so different from them. And I think it also kind of makes them feel like bad to a certain extent to like interact with someone who like, you have a house and they don't. And I feel like people feel bad about that a lot of times, in a way that makes them like kind of feel guilty, and then like they end up not wanting to talk to people, or like help people out and things like that, and I feel like that's a really big issue.
That's taking it too far. Yeah, to not act. Like, I get that. I deal with feelings of privilege and guilt myself because I live in a car and not in a tent. So it's all, I think, relative. But so for me, I'm like, okay, well, if I have a car, then what can I do to like leverage this privilege that I do have? But honestly, it's not even like, it's not like a special thing that I do. You see it everywhere. Like any of these like spots where there's houseless folks that are together, like people are looking out for each other. And there are people who are really just trying to make sure that people have what they need as much as possible. And sharing things, like sharing food is really common. If there is food, then everybody around is going to eat. And I don't want to say like all houseless people are friends with each other. Like that's definitely not the case. But people form pockets. They form groups where they feel more able to get along with these people. And I think it definitely helps to have other people around and not have to feel like you're all alone, like nobody cares. Like when having a van, there's car trouble. Like it's not van life. I try to say, like I live in my car. It's not like a fancy situation. And so, I've had a number of times when my battery dies and I have jumper cables, but I can't jump my own car. So I have to wait and I have to try to flag somebody down. And trying to do that I almost always end up in tears because it is so disheartening the way that people just straight up ignore you if they think, not even if they can tell, because how can you tell, but if they think that you're poor or unhoused, then like, I don't ask them what's going on in their minds. But I've had people like where I'll be saying like, hello, excuse me to like one individual person who's by themselves, and they will just eyes straight ahead, keep walking. And I'm like, okay, that's really blatant.
Yeah, that's so disrespectful. And I feel like people don't even think about like if they actually stopped to like help you for a little bit and like slow down.
It's 5 minutes.
And like just like don't think about yourself for 5 minutes. It'll probably make you feel better to like share some of your time and help someone else out.
Yeah, it might make them feel good.
And it just makes everybody feel good.
Like, I don't know. Like, what I can think is, like, there's these, like, they say, like, back in the Old West, like, there might be some crying person outside a wagon, and you go to help them, and then a bunch of people come out of the bushes and jump you or whatever. And so that's my thinking, is that they think it's a trick, even though I'm like, right here. Like, I've been parked right here with my battery dead. And trying to get somebody to come. People are like all up at the parks and stuff, and like the only people who would help are other poor people. People whose own cars are having issues, have broken windshields or things like that. But that's there's kind of this joke that like if you need some money, ask a poor person.
Yeah,
because we'll all just keep passing it around.
Like, I feel like the people who tend to have the least also are kind of the people who are like most willing to share and like be supportive of other people. And it's just like people who have more, I guess, like they haven't experienced like things like that themselves, and so they just somehow can't empathize with it.
And maybe too, like they'll catch it. Like, oh, if I start interacting with poor people, then I will catch the poor or something. Right. Because I think there is the sense that it's innate, that there's a reason why some people are in houses and some people are on the street, which is, like there is a reason, but it's not. It's not the moral reason that people think.
People too do like totally attach like moral kind of assumptions to like being unhoused or like having less money. It's like they assume it must be like a personal like flaw, like there's something wrong with that person.
Yeah, folks tend to think that houseless people are more violent, that if something bad's going to happen to a housed person, there's a good chance it's going to happen from an unhoused person acting violently, that people are irresponsible, that if we could have had houses, we would be in houses, so clearly we can't manage that everybody has mental health issues, which it's not even half of people who are unhoused who feel like they need mental health services that they're not already getting. And they think that a lot of people are using drugs that they don't approve of, because of course, some drugs are okay, but yeah, that people are out here using drugs and so therefore can't be trusted with money. And then again, it's not even close to half of people out here who need substance intervention. So those are really just like assumptions that are being made without actually talking to people.
Yeah. And I feel like with a lot of those assumptions too, like people don't think about that, like unhoused people experience a lot more violence and things like that than people who do have houses.
Mm-hmm.
And like a lot of it comes from people who are housed, like
The
attacking
harassment.
those communities.
Yeah, I mean, and here in Denver, we have this street enforcement team, which is just a few years old now, but it's basically like regular citizens were deputized to hand out quality of life citations to houseless people, and that's the way it is. And now, like, these street enforcement teams will just be around and are able to harass people, and there are complaints of this happening. I mean, that's a big issue is like the authority and the top-downness of it here, because like you have the police, you have the street enforcement team, and there's the Department of Transportation Infrastructure. And so DOTI is the organization that decides, hey, we're going to have a sweep, typically, and they schedule it, and they send people out to enforce it. But there's like advocacy groups have tried to secure rights for houseless people, property rights, basically. And so there are certain, like when there's a sweep happening, for example, people are supposed to receive certain amounts of notice. Their property is not supposed to be just trash. It's supposed to be stored and an opportunity given for people to reclaim it. And there's issues with, with the logistics of those things already. But does it even matter? Because you've still got cops and other enforcement teams harassing people, trashing belongings, performing sweeps in the middle of the night when there's nobody to report it, and lots of other blatant violations of these requirements. And I have been one of numerous people who has contacted the director of this department in DOTI and who has tried to be outspoken about these violations, and they're completely brushed off. So even when there is violence, like if there's violence even coming from the police or from these teams, it's considered to be a non-issue, because who cares, except for houseless people who generally don't have the stability and energy to be regularly involved in their own advocacy and in the advocacy groups. So overall, it's one thing I want to bring up is race, because like right now we're talking about like houselessness and unhoused people, and like, after the Civil Rights Act of 1964, it became less appropriate or less allowable to treat Black people with discrimination. And so, something else had to come about, because our government is not a government that says, hey, we're going to do what the people need. Our government has ideas, and they try to squash out any outspoken elements, any the hippies, like it's all right if you're going to be a hippie, but if you're going to start protesting against the war, then we have to take action. Or like if you're going to start fighting for your rights, or trying to change things, then action is going to be taken. And so I really think that we're at a point where houselessness needs to be a protected status, just like felony status needs to be protected, because like these are ways where we have sanctioned discrimination. You already have a totally disproportionate number of Black, Indigenous people in prison and on the streets, and so it just allows for the othering to keep going, so long as you can decide that any person is not deserving of basic rights or food or shelter or things like that.
The people in power who are kind of like making those laws and those rules and stuff, they think that like other people need to have less in order for like them to have more and for them to keep their power.
And also that, you know, if we're just given more, that we become entitled and don't learn work ethic or something like that. When it's like something like half of people who live outside have jobs. A lot of people work. A lot of people are doing everything they can. Like look up the statistics for housing vouchers, what's available, and things like that. And surprise, you can't find them from official sources because they don't track it. You can only find it from like individuals or groups who decide to do their own research, to do their own surveys. Because the decision makers, the people who create these policies where people are not able to access housing, for example, or not able to, if they are living outside and it's 100 degrees or it's 10 degrees, are not legally able to shelter themselves, that's like a camping ban violation. I don't know. I'm like going off too much on these directions. But like the decision makers aren't. First off, they're not subject to the harassment. They don't have to deal with it, and they kind of believe that they will never have to deal with it, like they are some special class of people who like will never have these needs. But it's such a common issue to experience houselessness. And if you get a count of how many people are houseless right now, that's not a count of all the people who have been houseless in their lives. It's really common. Well, I didn't realize how common until I became houseless myself. And people are telling me about like, oh, I lived in my car, or I was just couch surfing for this period of time. And also, again, like that definition of houselessness, like I said before, I didn't realize that I had experienced houselessness. Like I spent a period of time, like I didn't want to have to live in a house where I felt like I had to be in a relationship with a person in order to have a place to live. So I was like, I'm going to pack a backpack. I'm going to see what I can do. And so I was couch surfing. I didn't have anywhere really to stay. And technically I was houseless during that time. And I experienced a lot of like insecurity, and like assault, some like abuse type thing. Like it's hard to talk about these things when it's like when you have definitions of terms and whatever. But now I feel a lot more like, now I know what my situation is a bit better, and so I'm able to navigate it more easily than when I thought that I was just traipsing around with my backpack and it's an adventure, it's fun, like even though I didn't have anywhere that I could go.
And I feel like a lot of people don't realize, like when you have housing and when you have money and you feel like secure in that, I feel like it's kind of easy, like you're protected from a lot of things, and it's kind of easy to feel like you're just like maybe different from other people who don't have that. Like there's something different about you that's maybe better. But a lot of people don't realize how close they might be to being unhoused or having to couch surf or living out of their car and different things like that. Especially like since housing costs are going up so much and like more and more people are having to find roommates and things like that. Like there's a lot more people who are like close to being unhoused and they don't even realize it.
Yeah, I mean, I personally believe, first off, that that a lot of like women or AFAB people are automatically housing insecure by default. So not saying that everybody in those categories is housing insecure, but I know already that housing insecurity disproportionately affects trans and non-binary people for sure. But even without that, like if you're in a position where societally you're expected to work less, or even if you do work, you're only making 80 cents on the dollar compared to certain other people, like already you are set up to have a harder time maintaining housing.
Thanks for listening to Denver Street Stories. We aim to help change the narrative surrounding homelessness by providing a platform to amplify necessary and diverse voices. We hope this sheds some light into a world often pushed aside and disregarded. We should hate less, love, and listen more.
Stay tuned for part 2.